I'm Vicky Linnane and welcome to Embrace Therapy podcast. I am a practicing art therapist based in Ireland. In each episode, I will interview guests from various fields of therapy and well-being with the aim to encourage healing through embracing therapy. My guest on the podcast this week is Sarah West. Sarah is a graduate from the Kootenai Art Therapy Institute in Canada. She's an environmental arts therapist. Environmental arts therapy is an intentionally structured and accompanied process that uses creative methods in relationship with the earth to support our well-being. It can involve many different ways of creating, such as movement, writing, and art making. This can be done spontaneously or by direction. Her unique combination of experience and training paired with the lifelong practice of connecting deeply with the earth enables Sarah to work alongside individuals and organisations to engage with the land, creativity and story to imagine possibilities, nurture well-being and facilitate regenerative connections. It's a real pleasure to have Sarah on the show, and I hope that you enjoy this podcast episode. Sarah West, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Hi. Oh, I'm just chuffed to have you, and I'm just excited as well, just to kind of chat like face to face, like because I feel like I've gotten to know you over the last year, just kind of messaging back and forth on Instagram, and you've been so kind with your time with me as well, and I'm very interested in doing one of your courses, which I'd love for you to talk about as well today, because I think a lot of us over here in Ireland would really like to see a little bit more of that side of things coming here, because you are not just an art therapist, you are an environmental art therapist, and maybe for people that are listening, they may not have an idea of what that is. So maybe you'd like to first just say a little bit about that, just to introduce where you're coming from.
Yeah, of course. Well, I am based in the southern interior of British Columbia in Canada. And I trained in environmental arts therapy. And that is a way of intentionally working with the land in a creative way. And it's held in a really structured and therapeutic process, and really works with the land, works with the therapist, and works with the client. And we're all kind of working together in session to support whatever needs supporting in therapy. And it's really incredible. It's a really powerful way of working, because it's not just you and the client and the art. You're folding in all of the wisdom that's contained in nature as well. And the interesting thing is that, like, you actively see nature participating in the process when you invite it in to therapy. So that's a bit of what environmental arts therapy can look like. It's so beautiful to witness. Mm-hmm.
And like that as well, it's like, it can supply a lot of the experience as well, I suppose, with that spontaneity of giving you something in a session, I suppose, then, because, you'll have your backdrop of being in the usual place where you would be. I presume each time it's a similar place that you go to for the sessions?
It really depends on the person, and it depends on the need. So sometimes it helps to have the consistency of going to the same location every time. But I do have an ongoing rotation of places that I'll go to depending on what the needs are that are arising in session.
Oh, that's really interesting. I really like that. Yeah. Because I can think of a few people for me, like, who would benefit from being like, oh, this is the same place I'm in every single time. But definitely there are some that need that little bit more. And I suppose it's integrating that curiosity a little bit more, and finding a little bit of play in different parts of the land. Like, I suppose um, I'm very curious about it because at the moment I'm actually studying to do nature play therapy. Um, so, and I suppose it's probably overlapping in some areas that you're interested in as well. Um, but I suppose this idea of using natural objects, found objects, and playing. So, you can go out into nature and I suppose five or six different things that you could find would have different textures. You could have your whole senses stimulated by the land that you're in. So that's a lovely starting point as well for getting people to connect with nature. And I think for me as an art therapist, stepping into nature, I feel like a bit scared sometimes because I'm so used to the room. But I think, you have to set up a framework or something, don't you, to kind of to do this. You can't just go with a blanket and just think you can kind of go into nature. Would I be right in saying that? That you have to have some kind of framework to underpin?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been hearing that a lot from other therapists, that they're wanting to work outside in a therapeutic capacity, but there is nerves.
Mm,
People are nervous about how to do that, and it's a very legitimate concern. How do you create safety for you and your client when you're wanting to work outside and with the land? So. Um, I when I was studying at the Kootenai Art Therapy Institute, I developed actually the triple spiral framework. And me having Irish ancestry and Scottish ancestry felt really drawn to the spiral.
lovely.
And Yeah, I created it just kind of magically emerged, actually, this way of how to safely hold therapy outside in this really contained and practical way of working. So that actually really works very consistently when you apply it. So I've started training other therapists in this triple spiral framework to learn how to work with the land. And it's so incredible to see what happens, that people finally gain that confidence to hold safe space outside, because there are those unknown elements of like what can happen when you're not within the four walls of a studio, and being able to anticipate and prepare for things is really important.
Mm. And, it's fair play. It's just amazing that you went and just was like, well, I'm going to make this framework because I know and trust myself and the experiences that I've had in nature to know what's needed. And you just filled in the blanks. So you have created this beautiful framework, the spiral framework. So that's beautiful. And I can't just let it go. You have to talk about your ancestors because, I'm Irish, and I know you've spent some time here and in Scotland as well, and I know that that's very important to your journey as well. So yeah, like I'd love for you to share some light on your experiences in Ireland and Scotland and how they've impacted on your own practice.
Yeah, well, my ancestry has really influenced how how I work and how I carry myself in the world. So, yeah, I have Scottish and Irish and a little bit of English ancestry, and I am also a settler on unceded Indigenous territory
Wow.
in British Columbia in Canada. And before I became an art therapist, I worked really extensively with Indigenous communities for over um, 10, 15 years now, and still do work with them. And one of the things that I was told very early on from an Indigenous elder was that I needed to connect with my own ancestry, and that I needed to connect with my own indigeneity, actually. And this started this huge journey of really reconnecting with my ancestors and everything involved with that. So I started learning Scottish Gaelic. Like visited Scotland and Ireland umpteen times lived there, um, really embedded myself in the land there and visiting ancient sites and learning the histories and the different the ceremonies like the cross quarter holidays and I even studied uh, introductory herbalism, so learning about the plants and the mythology. And what I found was is that there's so much beautiful ancient earth wisdom that's
Mm.
accessible to all of us, even if your skin is white. And that when you look far back enough, that there's a lot of teachings there about how to connect with the earth. So I have folded in a lot of my understandings and teachings about the land and how to connect with the land based on what I've learned about my own ancestry. And what it does is it really grounds me in my practice and my way of being. Um, and it's really incredible that recognition that happens when
Mm.
um, yeah, you're working with the land and you know it to be true because of like your ancestors had
Mm.
access to this as well. And a lot of what I see, even in my clients, is this reclaiming of our indigenous ways of being and connecting with the land, and that we sometimes need a little bit of help getting there.
Yes.
Um, to because it's been a long time um, that some of us, and when I say us, like white settlers, sometimes some of us have been disconnected from the land.
Yeah. Oh, that's so true. Um, like there's so much in that what you just said that I could just pick any point. But um I suppose like even just thinking about those rituals, those Celtic ceremonies and they're really becoming celebrated more and more every year here, whether it be the moon cycles and celebrating them or the Celtic calendar. I'm seeing that you know, a lot more of my friends are now taking part in these rituals and yeah, like reclaiming this history and feeling connected to themselves by rooting themselves in their history. So I completely recognize that shift in some of my friends. Um, and I suppose there is that kind of thing with even the pandemic, just that slowing down of pace, that people got time to be curious because there was more time, that more time to be um I guess yeah, I suppose curious is the best word I can come up with right now, but like you were saying, it was suggested to you to go and find this grounding before you became an art therapist. But that's how you found it. But you're kind of bringing this to your clients now as well, where you're kind of saying it's there in you. You just have to find this connection. So even that, it's like you're continually finding roots for people as well, which I just think is gorgeous. Yeah.
Yeah, and we all have this inside of us. Like it is a remembering.
Hmm.
We know how to connect with the earth at a really deep level. We sometimes just need some prompting or encouragement or uh, like practical tips and tricks for how to actually do that. And we are seeing a huge resurgence in connecting with the earth and this rewilding or the goddess movement, whatever you want to call it. There is this like widespread um, deepening of our roots and also refinding that connection because if we look at the history of what's happened over the centuries, it has been a systematic um, process of removing people from the land, and sometimes quite violent process of removing people from the land. And that is our legacy. This that is our legacy of having that disconnect, that purposeful disconnect. And now it's the time for reclaiming. It seems like that, yeah, this era, this time frame whatever wherever we find ourselves right now, it seems like there's this strong forward momentum, also prompted from the pandemic, as you were saying, of finding this reconnection and the powerful healing that happens when we reconnect with the earth.
Yeah. You know, you're in Canada, I'm in Ireland, but we're still connected even on that level of being like, well, I'm recognizing it in, in the people around me. But yeah, like where I work at the moment is Sow Earth Projects, which is basically a farm, a woodland area that is part of the therapeutic process. Um, and I suppose the only part of it that I'm really kind of getting into now is this kind of fenced garden. I haven't gone into the wilder parts of it yet, but I'm getting more and more confident, and I know my clients are feeling that too. Um, but the predictability in that space being kind of framed, I suppose, has been very nice. Um, However, what you were saying there about like, reclaiming and talking about the land and that, like it made me think about how amazing the owners of Sow Earth projects, they actually over the pandemic they had time and they received funding, so they planted over 20,000 trees. Like
Oh
seriously,
my god.
like just gorgeous.
Yes.
And, particular trees that are, long in threat, so like, there's the Scottish pine. There's another type of tree as well that, would have been taken out and, we would have been a natural forest, land
Mhm.
before everything was made to be farms and for crops and everything. So yeah, the land was taken, and with that, our heritage, So it's just this lovely reclaiming of the land, but also in a very thoughtful way, because they had to choose these particular trees that are native, and then there's another one as well. It's called the Wolfgang Forest, which you can look up as well. You can buy a tree to be planted in the land in Wicklow, and you can actually get a certificate, and you can visit it as many times as you want, and they also send you photos of its development, and
Oh
just
my goodness. I love that
it's
so much.
so
Yes.
nice. And you're kind of part of this process of reclaiming the land, and I just think that that's so important right now. And I know that that's something that you're very interested in as well, and something that I wanted to kind of touch on today as well was something that you mentioned before, which is eco grief, and I think it kind of ties into this a little bit with how the land has been, you know, like not tortured, but like it's been stripped of its uniqueness because we manipulated it for crops, and I suppose this idea of bringing back in native trees and everything, I just think is great, and it's great healing for the land. But could you maybe walk us through what eco grief is, and if there is a connection to what I've been saying?
Yes, absolutely. Um, well, firstly, ecological grief is a concept that's gaining in popularity. People haven't really had it on their radar for a while. And that ecological grief um, is a grief that we have when we see what has happened to the earth in a negative way, and what we've done as humans
Mm,
to the earth. And when we're noticing things like climate change and climate crisis and the earth changing in ways that we don't recognize anymore, it can create this ongoing sense of grief and sometimes anxiety about the state of the planet and what that means for us as humans, and
mm,
what that means um, for us moving forward and future generations. And it can be particularly pronounced when you are connected with the land, because there's a love there and a familiarity there. And then when you're seeing the pain of the earth, or you're really in tune with the changing dynamics of the earth, it's really impactful. And a lot of times, folks don't know what that means, that like what they're actually experiencing is ecological grief, and it's incredibly normal thing to experience. And yeah, so I've started working with folks and holding workshops on a regular basis to talk about what ecological grief is, to normalize it, and talk about different ways that we can address and honor our ecological grief, because it is a really natural thing to try to shut it out or shut down.
Hmm.
And you do that by disconnecting from the land, but then that has its own host of issues as well. So, um, yeah, it's really incredible. There's Francis Weller talks a lot about ecological grief, so I highly recommend reading some of his work if this is something that you might be experiencing.
Thank you. I will definitely do that. Yeah.
Mm.
And I can put it on the minutes as well, like the notes. Yeah, that's just gorgeous. Um, yeah, and to kind of come back to you, because I know we could probably talk about Earth and the connection that we have, because I feel like we have that in common, that we really are passionate about it. Um, but I'd love to know a little bit more about you as well, because you were saying that you would have come to Ireland, you would have come to Scotland, and it's that reclaiming of your roots, and getting an understanding of who you are. But, you know, when you decided to become an art therapist, or when art therapy became on your radar, I suppose, um, was it a connection to those lands that got you there? Because I'm feeling that the journey might have led you there and then shown you the way, maybe.
Yeah, well, I've been connected with the earth ever since I was a little kid. Like I was running around barefoot in the forest since since I was a little kid, and my parents had to ring a cowbell to try to get me
Oh,
to come
wow.
in for dinner. And so I've known the feeling of like moss underfoot and like crystal blue lakes, like swimming in them. And I've had a really deep and intimate connection with the land
Mm.
since the beginning. And just deep, deep love for the earth. And so I actually found myself working for Indigenous communities and for government, leading consultations and policy on environmental issues.
Right.
So, anytime anyone wanted to do something to the land, um, I was the point person for leading the talks between different groups of people for what that would look like and what the impacts could be and how you could mitigate the environmental issues and things that
Wow.
would arise. So, and that's still my heart's love, is talking with people who are making decisions about the land and how we work with it. Um, and But at the same time, I've always had a thread of creativity and art and myth. And I found myself going on, we'll call it like a heroine's journey,
Mhm.
a vision quest, like any of those cliche um,
Mhm.
things. And I walked for 6 months across Scotland and Ireland and
Mm.
England, following plants and myth that I had been studying. And at the end of it, environmental arts therapy found me. I had no
Incredible.
choice in the matter. I didn't even know it existed. And then I discovered it, and there was no going back. So I had to go and do a career change and study environmental arts therapy and do all the things. And yeah, and now I'm also like working with uh, uh, people in positions of power in government and with First Nation communities, um,
Mm.
about how to use environmental arts therapy as a tool for making decisions around the
Mm.
land.
Wow, that's like
Yeah.
full circle there, isn't it? It's like, yeah, the both hands there. It's incredible that you've done that. It's amazing. Um, Gosh, that's such a beautiful image of you just walking, following the plants and the myths, and yeah, just yeah, I just feel like that's just incredible, and that younger self of you being barefoot, like that was you that led you there. Do you know? That's just magic. I love that. Um, yeah, and I suppose like I personally have like heroes in this area. Like one of them is Jennifer Ramsey. She's an art therapist from Scotland, but she lives in Spain. Um she's amazing because she does a lot of mythology in, yeah, so like even recently she did like Hansel and Gretel, and she talked about that, and she brings in a lot of those stories as well as myths, and she does Celtic ceremonies, but all with this underpinning framework of art therapy. And yeah, I really love these threads just making this gorgeous, you know, weave, I suppose. It's just really lovely to think of it as that, this lovely tapestry of how you can pull your different interests and make them work, all these concepts work together, just so beautifully. So, like, why not, follow plants and myths and then end up where you are? It's just
Yes,
like, why not?
yeah.
I just think it's gorgeous.
And that's a lot of what I talk about with people in my triple spiral training and with my clients is that it's really essential to follow what it is you're attracted to,
Mm.
because your body, your psyche has really deeply embedded inherent wisdom in it that you might not be consciously aware of. So if you are drawn to do whatever it is, if you're drawn to a certain plant, if you're drawn to go walking for 6 months, if you're drawn to whatever it is, if you have this kind of deep impulse in you, it's really important to follow it because there's some inherent wisdom in you that's trying to show you what your medicine
Hmm.
is.
Hmm.
So it's important to follow
Yeah,
these things.
yeah.
And it's funny, the interesting thing also about myth too is that it's very land based, that there's a lot of teachings out there about how myth itself actually emerges from the land, and you
Mm.
can there's a certain flavor that myths have depending on where they come from, that are, once you start watching them and noticing them, and so the stories that come from the land, you can see the landscape and the culture and the people really reflected in these stories.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of Blind Boy. Do you know him? He's part of this a group called the Rubber Bandits, and they are how can I describe them? To me, the only way I can describe them is if you are a fan of Shakespeare, do you know the way the clown or the jester is actually the one with the deepest wisdom in Shakespeare stories? Like, so these are the clowns, you know,
Yes.
of our culture right now. So Blind Boy Boat Club is the name if you want to Google. But he has his own podcast, and it's called the Blind Boy Podcast. But he is brilliant for that, for bringing in the land and having this really curiosity, and calling it a hot take where he'll, pull back the curtain and look at like the myth or the story or the land, and make meaning out of it, but in our cultural references. So it's amazing because how he does it. He uses pop culture as well. Like it's just beautiful. So you should definitely check him out because he will blow your mind, really. He's just he's out there. He's fairly wacky. But he's written books as well. He's really interesting. But he's mentioned a lot of those things as well. Um, because he's also a performing artist and a painter and everything. So he's he's kind of using those tools to connect us all to the land that we live on, which I think is just genius. But yeah, like I suppose that's one person example again of following your medicine. It's just another branch of that, I suppose. But yeah, so like for me, when I go out with clients, even if it is that framed kind of boundaried garden, I can see that like, over the weeks they might attune to nature a little bit more. They'll notice a little bit more. Um, they'll ground themselves a lot more quickly because it might take them a little while to, shake off the disconnect that you spoke about as well. Um, so that reconnection is really lovely to see. Um, and then I suppose I know that you would start with maybe a grounding exercise, like I think that's how you start your sessions. But I think it's so lovely when you can actually see someone just be actually grounded just by sitting on the ground even. Do you know, like just like I've arrived, I'm back home. It's like kicking off your shoes when you get in the door or something. And it takes a bit of time for some people to get to that place, but it does become a real yeah, a real part of the process once it does happen, and I really love that. Like it's like seeing another attachment or something, the if you know what I mean. Yeah, you do,
Yes.
you do.
Yes. It's incredible to watch those
Yeah.
those things happen in ourselves and with our clients.
Mm.
And it's a really basic, simple thing, but actually even just touching the earth for 10 seconds, it
Hmm.
will ground you, and completely reset you. So if you're having one of those like frantic, frazzled days, literally two hands on the earth or on a tree, for even 10 seconds alone will bring you into that state of groundedness and just clear. Um it's really incredible to experience and to watch. And when you take that extra bit of time to tune into your senses and to ground, that brings your body physically into a state of receptivity
Mm.
to connect with the earth and to also notice what it is that you need to be noticing. And that's why environmental arts therapy or working outdoors therapeutically is really powerful, because it actually brings your body into this really slower state of being, which allows an opening or a spaciousness for you to hear and see things that maybe you wouldn't be normally if you're just going really hard, really fast
Hmm.
all the time.
Hmm.
And I also love this image of you in a contained garden, and that's with the kids, and that's where it starts. It starts at our doorstep, and it starts with our gardens that we have surrounding our homes. And there's a lot of power in the garden. There's a lot of power in the beautiful containment that gardens hold too. And that sometimes that's exactly what we need, is having that, like, that safe contained space. And that's what our medicine is at the time.
Mm.
Like, you don't need to be in the wilds, roaming the forest, climbing to the top of the mountains to have these rich experiences with the earth. And I love what Mary Reynolds, she's an Irish reformed gardener. What she says about gardens is that, and about connecting with the earth, is that um, we can court the land.
Ah.
There's this idea of courting the land where we go back to the same place
Mm.
many, many times over and over and over again. And she talks about how this, what this courting looks like. You're talking to the earth, you're singing songs for the earth, maybe you're writing some love letters, you're noticing all the little details, you're
Oh.
praising how wonderful this one plant is growing. Um, and this regular return and this courting of a specific piece of land is incredibly powerful for deepening your roots and your connection with the earth. So, like returning to the same garden over and
Mm.
over is a beautiful practice in deepening a relationship.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's yeah, it's funny. It's like I really love that. Mary Reynolds, is it? Yeah, that's
Mm.
beautiful. Courting. Yeah, I love that idea. It kind of reminds me of Julia Cameron and how she talks about an artist's date. And for her, a lot of the time, it's walking, and trying to find, maybe my senses are going to be stimulated by this walk, and she'd go out and she'd do it like that, and she'd pencil it into her diary. This is my date this week, and it would be something like that, just walking in her favorite park or something like that. But it is that it's just that ritual, I suppose, that you can make of returning to the space. I really like that. Um, and yeah, like even this particular garden I was telling you about, like, there's some fruit trees in it. So every season it's going to look a bit different, so that's really nice as well. To kind of see it develop and to see its process. Yeah, and see how you've changed alongside it, which is really nice too. Um, yeah, and it reminds me as well when when you were talking about like just even putting the two hands on the ground. Um, I used to work in a shop called Muji. It's like a Japanese lifestyle shop. I worked there for years in the city, and sometimes I get really busy in the shop, and I'd have like a half an hour break, and I'd run out to Stephen's Green, which is this park in the middle of Dublin City, and I would just literally find the biggest tree and just hug it for as long as I could.
Yes.
Yeah, like in the middle of the park in the city, I was like, I know that's all I need right now. And I would go back to work completely recharged and not frazzled or full of anxiety at all. Like it would just be that, yeah, just that recharge. Yeah, I really, and I still do that, like, but luckily I don't get to that state of anxiety anymore. But definitely working in kind of, you know, high production kind of stress environment, work, 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 I found my way through that just so simply of just running out to the same place, like you said, and connecting.
Yeah.
And that's it. Yeah, like you said, it doesn't have to be climbing the mountain. It can be, yeah, exactly.
Well, that's a beautiful example um, of you just following what your impulse is and like finding a way to meet your need in the
Hmm.
moment, and it working. And it's also a gorgeous example of we don't need to spend months and months outdoors, and we don't need to spend like huge amounts of time to connect with the earth, because sometimes we don't have that time.
Hmm.
I've had that too. Like I used to work in downtown Toronto, surrounded by like high rises and concrete, and like super busy life. There's so many people out there with like an incredibly, incredibly busy life that don't have a lot of time. But actually, connecting with the earth doesn't take a lot of time when you find those um, small pockets like you did, running outside and hugging the tree
Yeah.
and coming back completely regulated
Yeah.
to work.
Mm.
Yeah, those are wonderful examples, and also of connecting with the earth wherever you find yourself. This is another important thing, that like you don't need to be in a like undisturbed rural area in order to connect with the earth. There's ways of doing that even if you find yourself in a busy city.
Hmm. Yeah, that's it. Um, and I suppose, even I don't know, like even if you have like this small little balcony, in your apartment to just get some soil, you can kind of make your own little um Zen garden or garden in your balcony as well, where you can just tend to it. And I suppose once you're doing it in a mindful way, you can get that
Yeah.
regulation for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, you can do that absolutely.
Yeah.
And I also, one of my, when I did work in Toronto and I was like on the 12th floor of this steel and concrete, there was a hawk that nested on the building across from me. And I could watch that hawk every day throughout the day. And I got to know that hawk and I got to know its preferences. I saw how it flew. I noticed when it was having a weird day. And I just had this ongoing relationship with
Mm.
this hawk, and we were at this like at the same level, its flight path and my office, and having even that way of
Mhm.
connecting with the earth and like watching on a daily basis this beautiful
Mm.
bird of prey
Yeah.
is another way that you can find that connection regardless of where your feet are planted.
Mm. And then do you find that connection then fuels or drives your creativity? Like, do you feel like it's one continuum, like, or does one feed the other? Or I suppose I'm curious about that as well.
Yeah, it's both. They both influence each other. I have always felt naturally prompted to create with the earth, or if I'm using more traditional art materials, to do land-based or earth-based art.
Mm.
Um, and and it's also often a reflection of my love for the earth. I think one of my favorite pieces I ever did was like my face curled up on like a big tuft of moss because it's my happy place.
Yeah.
And yeah, but also creativity looks so different for every person. And we don't have to identify or self identify as an artist or like having good art making abilities because that's such a
Hmm.
block. We all have our own ways of creative expression, however that looks like.
Yeah. And I think there's something as well about using nature to kind of drop that perfectionist part of us. Do you know, I find that when people use the elements to make art, so like something like, even Andy Goldsworthy, that kind of installation kind of pieces and stuff like that, they're beautiful and amazing art, but we can just play with the materials and create in that way. And I definitely find that those people that might be uh, so uptight and feeling like I can't touch the paint because I don't want to be judged or, uh, criticized, and that's that perfectionist part where they can't get there. I find like that bringing them out into nature totally strips that away. And then almost I can bring them back into the room and we'll give it a go if they want to. But sometimes it's just, I don't know, I just find that that is a little bit more gentle on us, that we can kind of let go of our expectations and we can just settle into play again, which is so nice. And I suppose I'm talking more maybe about adults in that moment. I was thinking more about adults, but in fairness, even children have this expectation of good art, bad art. Yeah. So, yeah, I think it's
Yeah,
important.
it's really embedded in us, from the way that we're educated in the school
Mm.
systems about what good art is, and it's quite regimented.
Mm.
And if you can't draw the three birds in one tree exactly as your kindergarten teacher shows you, then it's bad art, and therefore you're not an artist. So literally every single adult has
Mm.
gone through this experience, and as a child, and we need to decondition this
Yes.
programming of what art is and what our creative expression is. And it is a huge block that
Mhm.
most people have. And the interesting thing about working outside and with natural materials is that they can be really hard, or they can be harder to control, or a dog's going to run by and
Yes.
tromp through your art, or the ocean is going to come sweep it away, or
Yeah.
um, you can't hold the pieces together that well because you don't have
Mm,
any glue to bind it. And it is a release of control
mm,
and sometimes uncomfortable reminder that we're not fully in control
yeah.
as humans, and working with natural materials does impact that.
Mm. Yeah,
And
that's
it's
so wise.
also,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and it's also really incredible to see that working with natural materials has such an impact on us too. There's just something so ancient, this ancient remembering of like when we're working with bone and stone and soil and clay and wood. It's there's just this really powerful impact that these materials have on us, that we sometimes have forgotten. And um, yeah, it's quite incredible working with them.
Yeah, absolutely. Even like, you know, a, a muddy puddle. Do you know, even just jumping and splashing in a muddy puddle, like, no matter what age you are,
Mhm.
uh, it just brings, like, you can't jump in a muddy puddle and not smile and feel amazing after it,
Right, and it comes back to what you were saying about play.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
like as adults, we've often forgotten how to play. And working outside with the land really prompts that ability to play, because we also
Mhm.
remember how to play. Like jumping in muddy puddles, it's
Yeah.
delightful. And if you're including that in your therapeutic process, learning how to play, yes, please.
Yes.
Like it all doesn't need to be dark doom and gloom, like digging up all of our worst
Mhm.
traumas. Also important,
Yeah.
but also it's so important to balance the
Mhm.
like all of the really difficult things that we deal with being human.
Yeah.
We've got a lot going on.
Mhm.
um like societally, globally, we've got so much crap going on.
Yes.
And in our own personal lives too, that it's absolutely essential to remember how to play and to jump in those mud puddles, because that is what's going to keep us sane. Is getting dirty and getting our hands all muddy. And it's
Yeah.
that it's really important to find that balance again and relearn how to play and jump in
Mhm.
those puddles.
For sure. Yeah, that's it. So everybody, go and find a muddy puddle. But yeah, that's so important. And I think as well, like, the ebbs and flows in nature, the rhythms of nature, the cycles in nature, we need to be reminded that that's in us as well, that we are part of these ebbs and flows, cycles, yeah, rhythms, they're in us too. So we'll have good days, bad days, just as much as Earth will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we know, we like inherently work with the seasons, whether we know it or not.
Yes.
That I always find March to be a really funny month, where people are like, "Oh, I feel really disheveled. I'm not sure what's happening. I feel kind of itchy and antsy and da da da." Da." And when you work with the seasons therapeutically, you're tracking what the energies of each
Mhm.
season is and how that's reflected in each of us in our lives and our energies. And you're
Mhm.
like, oh, well, actually, March is spring, which means that things are muddy, things
Yeah.
are coming up to the surface, and that there's kind of this underground movement that's happening to out, launch out of the earth, the darkness, the soil. And
Mhm.
part of being a nature based therapist in whatever modality you work with is normalizing, hey, if you're feeling antsy and weird in March, it's because it's spring and this is why. And you can follow that too with like summer and fall and winter, and also working, noticing what's happening in the stars, and if if it's a woman, like noticing what's happening on your moon cycle, and really folding that into your therapy and your understanding of yourself. That like we are of the earth, we are all connected, and our bodies and our psyches reflect this. And yeah, part of being a nature-based therapist is reflecting that back to folks as well, when they're like, I feel weird but I don't know why. Like, oh well, actually the stars are doing this today, we're in Mercury retrograde.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I find that so fascinating. And I must say I'm only kind of understanding those connections now, even though like one of my friends who were in the training group with me, you know how everybody gets to know each other so well, and one of her I suppose her passions was the moon cycles, and how it affected her artwork, and she did beautiful work. Emily was her name, and she did just stunning work with that. And it's funny, it's taken me such a length of time to kind of realize how deeply and like how profound the connection is, you know. And it can be really nice peace of mind as well to be like, oh, okay, that's what's going on, you know. I love that. Yeah. Um, yeah, I feel like we could talk about so many things. I have like loads still written down to ask, but yeah, I don't know, like I feel like, you know, even just us chatting the way we have has really had this lovely flow to it. And um you know, maybe a nice way to end our conversation might be just even a connection to where we are right now. So like I'm in Ireland, and I suppose we're on different time zones. And it was tricky for my head to work out today, but I managed to get there. Thank you very much for being patient. But yeah, and you know, spring has sprung here. It was incredible the last like even 3 days. It's got pretty warm. Um uh, like like I wasn't wearing a coat today. Uh you know, it was really lovely. The daffodils are everywhere, and I saw like loads of lambs today when I was out driving in the countryside. Um yeah, it's really changing. There's nests in the trees. Just absolutely gorgeous here. But yeah, I'd love to just check in with you with how things are for you in the season that you're in.
Yeah, well, I we are in um, mountainous forest here in southern British Columbia, and it's still the tail end of winter, where the really thick snowbanks are melting, slowly melting, but they're rock solid now at this point. And there's patches of really damp, muddy green earth happening. But we're seeing the swans return, some of the
Mm.
ducks return, and and those kind of really beautiful warm days, but cool nights.
Love that.
Mhm.
I love that. Like that they're the best lights for checking out the stars, I feel. Like, you know, just those really cool, icy kind of nights. Um, yeah, thank you so much, Sarah. This has just been gorgeous. Um, for anybody who's listening, who wants to check out your triple spiral framework course, or even the groups that meet for eco grief, how can they get in touch? How can they find out more about you?
Sure, yeah. So my business is Earthen Vision, and I have all of my information on my website, www.earthenvision.com. And it lays out the one-on-one support if you're interested, as well as ecological grief workshops and training for creative arts therapists on how to work with the land and the triple spiral framework. So that information is all there, and I'm always happy to chat with anyone who's interested.
Yeah, thank you so much for like I said at the beginning, for always writing back to me, because like, you know, I was like really so taken aback by your work, and just how beautiful even your Instagram page is. It just how it just invites you to be curious in the land that you're living in as well. Like it's just this lovely invitation. Um, so thank you for inspiring, so many. It's beautiful. Um, yeah, thank you so much, Sarah. And I hope that if you do come back to Ireland anytime, that you'll give me a call.
I will, absolutely.
I'd love to take you, to certain spots and go for a walk with you. It'd be lovely. Yeah.
Looking forward to it.
Gorgeous. Thank you.
Well,
Okay.
thank you so much for having me today. It's been really wonderful chatting.
Wow, it's been my pleasure. Absolutely. Um,